You have the wrong office, sweetheart. This wing is for real intelligence officers, people who actually earned their clearance instead of marrying into it. My brother-in-law's voice cut across the operations floor like a whip. 22 analysts turned in their chairs to watch. He straightened his jacket and smiled the way he always smiled right before he humiliated someone, wide and warm on the surface, cold underneath. My father chose him to run this division because he actually has the instincts for it. You just have the last name. Instantly, the room erupted. Not open laughter. Something worse, that low ripple of amused silence where everyone agrees, but nobody wants to be caught agreeing out loud. To them, I was nothing. A woman in a plain gray blazer with no visible rank, no visible clearance badge flipped forward, nothing to mark me as anything other than someone's unfortunate relative who'd wandered onto the wrong floor of the building. They had no idea that the woman they were quietly laughing at was the only person in that room who had read the real files. Before I tell you exactly what happened next, if you believe family should never be a weapon used against you, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments, sister, brother, cousin, in-law, who is the Leo in your family. The silence after his comment lasted maybe 4 seconds, but it felt like standing at the bottom of a pool. I kept my hands folded in front of me, one thumb pressed hard into the opposite palm, an old habit from ranger school, a way to keep your face still when your body wants to do something else entirely. I did not blink. I let my eyes rest on Marcus Wren's face, and I watched him enjoy it, watched him drink in the discomfort of the room like it was owed to him. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Proverbs 15:1. I said it silently in my head the way I always did, an anchor, a rope thrown down into deep water. I let 5 more seconds pass. I let him get comfortable. Then I spoke, and my voice came out flat, almost bored. Are you finished, Marcus? He blinked. He had not expected a response at all, certainly not one delivered without a single tremor in it. He opened his mouth to fire back something else, some second insult already loaded and ready, and that was the exact moment the door at the far end of the operations floor opened. It did not slam. It did not need to. Director Alan Whitfield does not slam doors. He simply walked in, and the temperature of the room changed before anyone even turned around. 22 chairs scraped back in near unison. Coffee cups were set down fast enough to slosh onto desks. Marcus straightened so quickly I heard his spine crack. This was, I realized, exactly the moment he had been hoping for. The director walking in to see him standing tall and commanding in front of a room, the golden nephew of the outgoing division chief, finally getting his due. Whitfield did not look at him. He walked past Marcus the way you walk past a chair that's in your way. No malice, just complete and total irrelevance. He crossed the floor and stopped directly in front of me, and then, in front of every single analyst on that floor, Director Alan Whitfield, a man who had briefed 3 presidents, came to attention and saluted. "Cypher," he said, loud enough that it carried to the last row of desks. "Good to have you back stateside." I brought my hand up and returned it. Crisp, automatic, muscle memory, older than most of the relationships in that room. "Thank you, sir." Whitfield dropped the salute and turned, finally, to address the floor, though his eyes flicked once, briefly, to Marcus, and in that flick was more contempt than 1,000 insults could have carried. "This is Major Renata Cole," he said. "Some of you may not know the name, you will know the call sign. Cypher ran the signals cell that gave us Operation Nightglass. She spent the last 14 months in a location I am not going to say out loud in an unsecured room. As of this morning, she outranks everyone on this floor except me, and she will be reviewing every operation this division has run for the last 18 months. I watched Marcus's face do something I will remember for the rest of my life. I watched 30 years of inherited confidence drain out through the soles of his expensive shoes. To understand exactly how we ended up in that room, I have to take you back 3 weeks, back to a dinner table in Alexandria, Virginia, back to the night my father looked me dead in the eye and told me I had never been anything more than a placeholder. 3 weeks earlier, my father's townhouse smelled like rosemary, and the particular expensive candle my stepmother always burned when she wanted a room to feel like money. Colonel Gerald Cole, retired, sat at the head of a table set for 8, though only 6 of us were actually eating, because my father preferred an audience even at family dinners. He held his wine glass up toward Marcus, the way a king holds up a scepter. "To the future of this family," he said, and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the way it does right before a mission goes sideways. "Marcus is taking over the division next month. He's got the instincts, the discipline, the bloodline energy this family has been missing. My stepmother, Diane, offered her small, practiced smile, the one she'd been giving me since I was 14 years old, and she married into a family that already had a daughter she didn't particularly want. My half-sister, Priya, curled her fingers around Marcus's forearm and looked at me with an expression that was almost pity, which was somehow worse than contempt. "You're still doing the desk job thing, right?" Priya asked, not really a question. Logistics, was it? Something with paperwork? I felt the old, familiar hook sink into my ribs, the same hook that had been sinking into me since I was 9 years old and watched my father teach my cousin how to shoot skeet instead of me. Since I was 16 and he told my guidance counselor that West Point was probably not realistic for someone like me, since I was 22 and stood in my dress uniform at commissioning, and he shook my hand instead of hugging me because, he said, a hug wasn't very military. "I am not doing paperwork," I said quietly. My father waved a hand like he was swatting a fly. "We don't need the whole speech, Renata. We know you enlisted. We know you did your little intelligence thing. That's fine. That's a fine career for you. But this family needs someone who can actually lead. Marcus has the fire. You've always been," and here he paused, choosing his words with the surgical cruelty of a man who has had decades of practice, more of a support role, someone who does the quiet work in the background so the real leaders can shine. "I want you to hit that like button right now if you have ever sat at a family table and been told, to your face, that your entire career was just background noise for someone else's spotlight, and drop a comment telling me exactly what they said to you, because I promise you, I have heard every version of it." Marcus smiled into his wineglass. He did not defend me. He did not correct my father. He simply let the moment breathe, let it sit there in the candlelight, warm and pleased with himself, because for the first time in his life, someone was finally seeing him the way he'd always believed he deserved to be seen. And it was happening at my expense, and he liked that part especially. I did not argue that night. I have learned, the hard way, over many years and several very expensive therapy sessions, that arguing with my father is like trying to reason with weather. You do not win. You endure, and then you leave, and you drive home in silence with your hands tight on the wheel until the shaking stops. What my father did not know, what none of them knew, sitting there in that warm dining room congratulating Marcus on a promotion he had not yet earned, was that I had already read his personnel file. Not because I was looking for ammunition, because 3 days earlier, my office had flagged an anomaly in a signals intercept coming out of a forward operating base in the Horn of Africa, a piece of intelligence that had been mishandled somewhere in the chain, routed incorrectly, delayed by 9 critical hours, and the delay had put 6 Marines in a position they should never have been in. 6 men who made it home because a staff sergeant on the ground made a call that wasn't hers to make and happened to be right. And the name attached to the mishandled routing, the name on the authorization that sent that intelligence down the wrong channel, was Marcus Wren. I did not say any of that at the table. I finished my dinner. I complimented Diane on the rosemary chicken. I hugged no one goodbye, because hugging was, as my father had once informed me, not very military, and I drove home to my apartment in Falls Church and sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets for 40 minutes before I let myself cry, and then I stopped. Because crying doesn't fix routing errors, and it doesn't fix fathers either. What I did instead was go back to work the next morning and request formal authorization to lead a retroactive review of Marcus Wren's division, the division he had not yet even officially taken over, the promotion my father had already announced at a dinner table like it was a coronation. It took me 3 weeks to build the case properly. 3 weeks of pulling logs, cross-referencing timestamps, interviewing analysts who were too afraid of Marcus's family connections to say anything on the record, until I made it very clear, quietly, in private, one conversation at a time, that I was not asking them to take a side. I was asking them to tell the truth, and the truth, once enough people are willing to say it in the same room, becomes very difficult to bury. If you have ever had to build your case in silence, brick by brick, while everyone around you assumed you were doing nothing, hit that like button, because that kind of patience is its own kind of warfare, and nobody claps for it while it's happening. So there I was, 3 weeks later, standing on the operations floor, while my brother-in-law informed a room full of analysts that I did not belong there. And I let him say it, I let every word land, because I needed the room to remember exactly how confident he had sounded in the 60 seconds before Director Whitfield walked through that door and called me Cypher. The review took 11 days. I want to tell you it was fast and clean, some dramatic single moment of confrontation. But real intelligence work is slow, and it is boring, and it is mostly reading the same 11 lines of a log file until your eyes burn, looking for the one inconsistency that doesn't belong. Marcus, for his part, spent those 11 days performing confidence like it was a costume he could not take off. He greeted me in hallways with a tight professional nod. He made comments in meetings designed to remind everyone that he was, in fact, still the heir apparent, that this review was a formality, a box being checked before he officially inherited the division. His uncle Alan had spent 30 years building, and his own uncle by marriage, my father, had spent 30 years bragging about. On day 6, he made his first real mistake. He came to my office, closed the door behind him, and asked me, in a voice pitched low and almost pleading, to soften the report before it went up the chain. "Renata," he said, and it was strange hearing him use my actual name instead of some diminished version of it. "We're family. Whatever happened with that intercept, I can fix it going forward. I don't need this following me into the new role. Nobody has to know the details." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about 6 Marines who came home only because a 26-year-old staff sergeant trusted her gut when the intelligence she should have had never arrived. "I love this family," I told him, which was true, in the complicated, scarred way that love survives inside families like mine. "But I do not love it more than I love the truth, and I am not going to lie in a federal report to protect your promotion." He left my office without saying anything else, and the next morning, my father called me for the first time in 4 months. He did not ask how I was doing. He never has, not once, not in 30 years. He asked me to reconsider. He used the word family 6 times in an 11-minute phone call. I counted, because counting things is another old habit, a way of turning an unbearable conversation into something I could measure and survive. He told me that Marcus had earned this, that I was being vindictive, that some petty jealousy over never being his favorite was clouding my judgment on a professional matter. And somewhere in the middle of that call, something in me went very quiet and very clear, the way it does right before you make a decision. You already know you're not going to walk back. "I am not being vindictive," I told him. "I am being accurate. There is a difference, and you taught it to me yourself, back when you actually wanted me to be good at this job instead of just quiet about it." He hung up on me. It was, I think, the first time in my adult life my father hung up on me instead of the other way around, and I sat there holding the phone for a long time, feeling something that was not quite grief and not quite relief, something in between, the exact texture of finally putting down a weight you had carried for so long you'd forgotten it was optional. If you're wondering what happens when you finally stop absorbing a narcissist's disappointment as though it were a fact about you instead of a fact about them, stay with me, because that lesson is coming, but it does not arrive the way you think it will. It does not arrive with an apology. Narcissists do not apologize. They regroup. The finished report went to Director Whitfield on day 11. It was 14 pages, sourced, time-stamped, cross-referenced against 3 independent logs, and it concluded, with no ambiguity and no room for spin, that Marcus Wren had misrouted a priority signals intercept due to negligence and an unwillingness to escalate a decision above his clearance level because he wanted to appear capable of handling it alone, and that this negligence had directly endangered 6 Marines on the ground in a contested area. It further recommended that he be removed from consideration for divisional leadership and placed under a formal fitness review. I submitted it at 6 in the morning, alone in the vault, the same way I had submitted every hard truth in my career, quietly, on time, without asking anyone's permission to be right. And that is how, 4 hours later, Director Alan Whitfield walked onto the operations floor to personally deliver the news and found my brother-in-law in the middle of telling 22 people that I did not belong in the building. What followed, after the salute, after the room went silent, was not shouting. My father raised me to believe that shouting is what people do when they've already lost the argument, and Alan Whitfield has never lost an argument in his life. He simply asked Marcus to walk with him to his office, and Marcus went, pale, his jaw tight, throwing one look back at me over his shoulder that I will genuinely never forget, not because it was hateful, but because for the first time in the 15 years I had known him, it was afraid. I did not go home that night feeling triumphant. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think we've all watched enough revenge stories that promise a clean, electric high at the end, and that is not what this felt like. It felt like grief, actually, a strange grief for a family that had never really existed the way I wanted it to, for a father who had spent 3 decades measuring my worth against a nephew he liked better, because that nephew reminded him more of himself. I drove home past the Pentagon, past the river, and I let myself cry for exactly the length of one red light, and then the light turned green and I kept driving, because that is, I have come to believe, the entire secret of surviving a family like mine. You feel it completely, and then you keep driving. 2 weeks later, Marcus was formally removed from consideration for the division. He was reassigned to a training billet in South Carolina, teaching orientation briefings to incoming analysts, a job with a fraction of the visibility and none of the prestige my father had promised him across a candlelit dinner table. I heard about it not from my father, who still has not called me, but from Priya, who texted me a single line that read, "I hope you're happy," as though justice and happiness were the same thing. As though I had done this out of spite instead of out of a report that simply, factually, would not lie for either of us. I did not respond to that text. I have learned, slowly, expensively, that you do not owe an explanation to people who only want your silence back on demand. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, and I stood at my window, and I watched the sun go down over the parking lot of my apartment building. Ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of evening that doesn't know it's supposed to feel significant. 6 months later, I got promoted again, this time to run the division myself. The same division my father had once promised, out loud, at a dinner table, to a man who had never once, in 15 years, asked me a single question about my work. I did not call my father to tell him. I did not need to. Priya told me later that he found out through someone at the Pentagon and did not say a word about it to anyone at Thanksgiving, just got very quiet and refilled his wine glass twice as fast as usual, and something in me, hearing that, felt less like victory and more like closure, which I have come to understand are not actually the same feeling at all, even though for a long time I thought they were. A month after that, an email arrived from him. No greeting, the way he always writes, straight into the point like giving an order. Renata, Marcus is struggling in South Carolina. This has gone on long enough. You've made your point. It's time to let it go and help fix this for the family. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen with my coffee going cold on the counter, and I felt the old hook try to sink in one more time, the part of me that is still somewhere underneath 14 years of service and a call sign that meant 3 times my rank salute without hesitation, 9 years old and standing at the edge of a skeet range, wondering why nobody offered to teach her too. I did not reply. I did not delete it either. Deleting felt like pretending it never happened, and it happened, all of it. Every dinner, every dismissal, every year I spent trying to earn something that was never going to be handed to me because it was never really about what I did. It was about who my father had already decided I was allowed to be. I opened a folder I keep on my desktop, one I had not touched in years, and I moved the email into it, and I closed the laptop, and I went outside and sat on my back steps and watched the sky go from orange to that deep, bruised purple that comes right before real dark. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, the silence did not feel like something I had lost. It felt like something I had finally, quietly, earned. If you have ever had to archive a parent instead of arguing with them one more time, if you know exactly what it costs to stop chasing someone who was never going to turn around, I want you to type it below. Just 3 words, I am free. And let me know, I am not the only daughter still learning how to walk away from people who call it family, but only ever meant it as leverage. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe, because there are more of these stories coming, and every single one of them is for the person in the comments section who's still waiting for someone to finally see them, the way that room finally saw me.